Um, okay, so yes, we started the recording. Shall we shall we shall we start? Right, we can start, or do we wanna wait for the latecomers? What do you think, Natalia?
People are slowly joining, but I guess we can start as we've got already, I guess, around 20 people or even more. So feel free to start, and I will be accepting the latecomers.
Okay, so I'll try to start slowly with the introduction. As I said, this is a very important situation for Glissando magazine. As we've delved into the format of audio papers for past several years, inspired by the call to experiment with format by the Seismograph magazine. I'm not sure if we have someone from Seismograph at this moment. I hope we do. Greetings for them. And actually, this marks the fifth and sixth project that is centered around this format. We experimented with some hybrid formats. I'll probably we'll talk about it a little bit more later. And so as I was saying earlier, these are two different kinds of projects for us. One being an issue and a whole made out of various audio materials that is open for later additions, but is supposed to be a little closed in a way as regular paper issues of Glissando are, and the other being open-ended in different way, in a way that we are thinking a lot about turning it into a long-lasting collaboration and a project that will be expanding over the years with additions of further materials. We thought that maybe we would start with a little tour of our website to show you actually how you can most easily access the materials. So I will now share my screen. As you can see, this is our, yeah, can everybody see my screen? Okay. So this is the menu of the audio paper section of the website Glissando.pl of the magazine, and it's accessible from our main page. As you can see, we have various different materials here. Essays, mostly in Polish, but not only, with focus on our current paper issue. And we do have this section called Cycles, Cykle in Polish. And we do have here our special projects. First one is called Ukraine Corridors, which is multi-language section of our website, devoted to contemporary Ukrainian music. But we also have here this section for design, especially for audio papers, where you can find all of our issues, including our Iran issue, which is actually more of a hybrid issue. And each and every issue has its own, visual design, and but we do also have for our readers, our Polish readers, our take at and what does it mean for us to be engaging in this form of your papers. And here you can find both London Voices and our latest Sonic Archive issue, and we'll be returning to that pages. Maybe I'll show you the how do they look at this moment. So you see, you enter the London Voices section, and you have we actually start with our editorial, written especially for us by David and Salomé, which we thought it was so important that we decided to translate it. Probably we'll talk a little bit more about later. And here, each and every material has its own hyperlink, because it's not only the audio file, but also text and sometimes different types of materials. So and with Marta's issue, it looks similar. You have the whole menu. I guess both menus were designed by Estera this time, but also other people for other issues designed it. So it's it can vary, and it's great that they vary. It gives us different styles to experiment also visually with our issues, and it's the curious the same. The editorials at the top, and then later various materials that comprise the issue. We often publish our audio paper issues in batches, like we would do, like we would publish sections of the paper issue separately to not overflow the readers and the listeners with 20 materials at the same time, but we try to expand it a little bit during time to celebrate our issues a little bit more. So that's basically how it is constructed. If you wanna for example jump right into one of the materials, you will see that it's always and the audio files are always embedded, and there are many different materials. But we often also experiment with forms. Actually, I'm one of the authors that never prepares the pure, true audio papers. And most of the time, I rather do something a little bit different with using text and visual materials as well. But it always depends on the vision of the running editor of particular issue. And after this broad introduction of how the audio papers fit into the larger practice of Glissando, let me say just two more words, that it's also very interesting to compare and contrast those two audio paper projects, as David and Salomé's London Voices are not typical in a way that when we started talking together about this initiative, we did not think about any topic or topical through line. Just if there is one, it sort of came out naturally through their through their curatorship, let's call it that way. Whereas normally our issues are, centered around particular topic. For example, as you saw, we had our issues centered around Indonesia, Iran, acoustic ecology, or loudspeakers and voices, also telephones. But Marta's issue follows that path, follows that trajectory, as it's centered around sonic audio sound archives. So that's why it's especially interesting for me.
Możesz zamknąć tę łazienkę, bo nic nie słyszę i iść sobie?
There was some interesting interference, I gotta say.
Please keep your microphones muted. I'm trying to control that, but there are so as many of us that's kind of difficult.
So I just wanted to emphasize this very interesting differences within approach, and wanted to start with a question to both Marta and David and Salomé, because one of the reasons for us when we thought about introducing audio paper format was to try to bring closer to Glissando people that maybe not always would want to write a 30 pages essay for us, but would maybe create their narrative in the audio formats. So that would be my first question to all of you. Who actually prepared audio papers for your projects? And I would love you to expand a little bit on that. Who makes audio papers? What kind of people? What kind of artists? What kind of scholars?
Shall I speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, because it's a question that came up. I remember when the discussions, because these audio papers, the context of the audio papers we have curated is the University of the Arts London, the London College of Communication BA Sound Arts course. And the idea behind that initially of introducing audio papers was to give sound artists another way of carrying out research and doing their final year dissertation in another form that was closer to what they felt comfortable with, because some students were not comfortable with writing dissertations. And so this was the initial idea. I remember hearing this. It was J. Milo Taylor who instigated the audio paper idea, and this was the initial idea, and it's not been the case in terms of the last 2 or 3 years of who has chosen to do audio papers. It has not been the case that it's been, I don't want to do that, so I'll do this. It's very much been a very positive choice to use audio papers in the Sonic for very particular reasons, to do with the research, the type of research, and yeah, it's so initially it was for people who wouldn't necessarily want to write. I think some of the audio papers that we have, probably all of them, could have been written. They don't show signs of having chosen this instead of that because of not wanting to do the writing, and it brings up some, it also brings up some very interesting questions, because we have these two pathways. We can, in fact, blend the two, and hopefully the dissertation and the audio paper will start communicating and be in conversation. This is one of the ideas, and of course, if the audio paper people are doing that for very specific reasons, not to keep away from dissertations, then of course they'll be happy to be in this conversation. And so, we had that sort of commingling of the two subjects. So it's, in our case, Antoni, it started like that, but didn't turn out like that.
But if I understand correctly, they can still do a written dissertation if they choose to do so.
Yes, that's the very interesting thing about it. We have both pathways running, and we are constantly we've been bringing them closer and closer together, and next year they will be in the same seminars completely, because we think that's very important to have that, because I think the sonic can help the writing, and the writing can help the sonic. So it's a cross conversation.
Absolutely. You immediately start with the most fascinating theme, but also it's just very practical from what you say, that if you're doing sound art, express yourself or do something for your education assignment as a sound artist. With the issue, like we did it in Glissando, it's a little bit more open. I think quite naturally, because the call is open to anyone interested, and it provided a magnificent variety of authors, because quite intuitively there are people who are experienced in sound art, radio art. They are experienced in doing things sonic, I would say. But there are some visual artists who kind of translated their visual work into sonic. There are people who I would call them, if we can make like personas, I'm not giving away names, let's like imagine them. We have this kind of academic type person who is doing this very thorough research, broad. Also, then the language changes. Like you can clearly feel and hear that this is like academic register of language versus more metaphoric or vague. And there are these combinations of people here, and I would say that what is in common for all of them is that, as I said earlier, they have something to do with the sonic. I would say that I would suggest that people who decide to submit the work would be the people who feel comfortable with this format, or are willing to learn a completely new skill, because that was, for example, my case. I was very determined to learn a new skill. So I did my first audio paper from scratch, learning on YouTube how to mix things in the software. So that would be the common, let's say, characteristics of the authors.
Yeah. I find it interesting that we talk about comfort, because I sort of think, I don't know whether it always has to be comfortable or whether it is always comfortable. And I actually find exactly the discomfort. Like, oh, I'm going to do an audio paper because this might be comfortable because I've been a sound art student for 2.5 years. And so I will feel comfortable. And then actually realizing, well, I'm still dealing with communication. I'm still dealing with how am I producing knowledge? Whether I produce knowledge through words that I write on a page, or whether I produce knowledge through the sounds. I just, for myself, or what I felt when we work with students on, well, how do you even get into that? How do you explain what a, because obviously they write to A levels essays. We are taught in school, you write knowledge down, you learn knowledge through writing, and you write it down again in a test or in an essay. And so all of a sudden the idea that no, the knowledge I'm now going to present is not just language, it's also I can interview other people, I can bring other people's voices in, I can sample, as there are examples of, for example, in Yusuf Mahmoud's work, there is a sampling of another work. I could sing, I can make other gestures, I can also bring my sound work in, as Esther Ajayi has decided to do. And these other sonic elements, and also bring with them their criticality and their knowledge. And that's what I find so fascinating. And actually, I think it's almost harder to do an audio paper than it is to do an essay, because we had all this time to know what is, we read books, we write stuff, we know what that is. But I also feel it is, dare I say it, richer. You know, I feel there is a richness. We can access the richness of knowledge that's not on the linear path of writing. And that is what fascinates me there. But what I also think is can become uncomfortable at first, at least. And then you have to work with the students through that, almost, and with yourself, almost to regain confidence in this new territory of expression and knowledge making.
And maybe one tiny comment to this discomfort can be very, very basic. So, for instance, if you decide to record yourself and include your own voice recording in your audio paper, for some people this is already a kind of a challenge to hear, you know, your voice being recorded. So yeah, many interesting things need to happen with you as an author before you submit the work.
Definitely.
Over the years, we had similar experiences at Glissando. I think I can speak here for the whole collective. That many people actually did send us audio papers that maybe probably would be more hesitant to work if it was a written essay or even an interview, something like that. But I really wanted to ask Salomé and David about two things. The first one being, how do you approach the purity of the format? Can the audio paper regarding your course include non-audio elements, materials, illustrations? I don't know what else, objects or different types of materials. What are the borders of the format for you? And the other thing I would love you to comment on is this what you said about the comfort? Because I had the feeling that it was an important aspect of the essay you wrote as an editorial for the London Voices. There is this deep political message, as far as I understood it, in your essay, that audio papers probably can be democratic and can bring out different voices within the academia. And I really wanted to ask those two questions and to focus on the specificity of the format and how it can bring out, you know, different voices.
Well, the first question is we have a very strict brief that we have to abide by due to the structure of the university, and we are to change it is very, very difficult. And it's interesting because when we were looking at Marta's website, one of the interesting, really interesting things about the process of looking at the audio papers of Marta's collection was this, the different, well, there were different texts associated with some of the audio papers. That there was one about the Patagonian wind, where, you know, these books were available online, and some most beautiful writing that's available as part of the experience of these audio papers. You know, the whole searching for new elements to this, including the translation, and the whole searching made it a really interesting experience. And we were talking about this, about how it would, you know, this linking of other things would be a really a lovely thing also for the students to be able to do. There's also the possibility for objects. There is a I think Juice put in, who did graphic scores, did put in some graphic scores as part of the submission, but they're not really, it's hard to make them available in this format because of the audio papers. And so yes, that's it's a sort of ongoing process of trying to think what can be achieved within the context of the university. And the second question, yeah, I mean, the only thing that struck me about that, I understand this is what we wrote, and I completely agree with obviously what we wrote, but there's something that also struck me was that some people don't choose the dissertation who are very political. Their project is really very political, but they choose it because they don't want their voice to be heard. And there can be this also happening where people, you know, it's sometimes not good to be visible. It can sometimes have the, you know, you can have more effect if you remain invisible and your voice isn't heard. And sometimes, you know, like in some of the political situations now, it's very important to stay out of the light, or, you know, and stay in the shadows, you know. So there can be different, you know, there can be, I agree with it, but I don't think it's a general rule, and that's not been my, you know, I think our experience with the students. There are students who will choose not to be part of that idea.
Staying out of the mic.
Yeah.
Maybe, if I can just sort of maybe add to both questions, what I also additionally to what David just said appreciated, which is something we can't do but love to do. So Marta, on your issue, there are some audio papers that are like 1.5 minutes and some that are like much longer. And I suppose something we would love to do is be able to say to the students, yes, if your research, if your content, if your if what you want to communicate in an audio paper demands it's 3 minutes long, like a pop song, make it as long as a pop song. If it needs to be 24 hours long, make it a 24-hour audio paper, which I personally would love to, you know, sort of hear or see what happens. It's like noise music. Something happens after 24 hours that doesn't happen after 5 minutes or after half an hour. But obviously, yeah, so you have these constraints. So it's like, I think there is a resistance, and there's a playing a political play as well as you say, Antec, within the institution with audio papers. Of course, there is a working against some conventions that hold a lot of canonic systemic knowledge. But then even within that resistance, even within proposing the audio paper in order to get a bit of wiggle room or playroom, due to the fact that, oh, but you need to be able to mark it. You need to be able to make it a comparative marking frame. We were given this, oh, it's got to be 30 to 40 minutes. And for example, that is sort of one fixer that that gets given to us by people who probably don't necessarily even know what an audio paper is, but because it has to be something recognizable and comparable for marking. And of course, I would say our paper that we wrote as an editorial, as an introduction, as a framing of the audio paper is maybe a bit of a wish world, a kind of, you know, what we'd like then rather than maybe what is entirely the reality. Also in part a provocation to bring a vagueness, a political vagueness, so a rigorous vagueness, if that's not too much of a paradox, into academia in order to pluralize. And for that, obviously, would need to be able to pluralize time. And we'd need to be able to pluralize as you said, Antek, you know, bringing in other objects additionally, so that the sound is a portal into a multiplicity, into plurality, of time and space, and voices and non-voices, rather than an other fixable, recognizable format.
Yeah. Yeah, the marking thing is a very interesting aspect of the audio papers. I mean, it's I remember when the first year we had the audio paper, and the students who had chosen it. It was the students who were very concerned that there was not a rigorous marking criteria. Because they had paid a lot of money and they didn't, you know, there all kinds of things were playing in their minds, and this is how far this kind of this kind of scientific measuring of everything infiltrates everybody. You know, it becomes so, you know, structural. You can't get away from it, and so we have to produce this marking system, which I think the relationship between this kind of marking system, which is very similar to dissertations, how it's applied to audio papers, is actually what makes this interesting and makes it critical, because otherwise you could just have practice. I mean, you know, sound art practice. You know, what is the difference between sound art practice and audio papers? Is this odd relationship and this ability to break open cracks, you know, to as Tom Costello said, to open the crack up a little bit, to expose the structure that is so invisible because it's so normalized, and that this is where it starts to play, so that you could have an idea of what the audio papers should do, but then you have this marking system imposed upon it, and it's that dialogue and that relationship that becomes really distinctive. And I think was also behind what we were writing was this awareness of the context that these things were happening within. Why we said it's this but not that. It's research but not that, and it's sonic but not that, because it's neither. It's working in the spaces in between, and I think in that sense makes it very interesting format within an institution.
And how do you position the audio paper and among other, let's say, forms of sonic media that like multiplied in recent years? I mean, audiobooks, podcasts, but also audio walks and other similar forms. How do you position it? Do you, for example, would you accept, for example, an audio walk as work that could be at your course?
Could be what? Sorry.
That could be that could be prepared for your course.
I think the issue in your question of could an audio walk be in a way an audio paper, I think the issue is, like with many things, context. And I think it goes back a little bit to what you just said, David. It is because it is written within the demands and expectations of an academic scholarly frame. You know, the word, I mean, we discussed sometimes, should it be an audio essay or should it be an audio paper? But with either word, essay or paper, we are expecting a scholarly engagement somewhere. And because it's within that context that even if you would make a sound walk, say, the basis of your audio paper, but you say, no, but it's an audio paper, we read it that way. And it is in that position that it can start to open the cracks. It's in that position that it can start to say, well, what's an essay then? What's a paper then? What's a scholarly engagement then? And I feel it. So it's, to me, that the answer to your question, I guess, is the context. It's the context for which it is composed. And for another context, recomposed, I am sure many audio papers could be nearing a radio program or could come into the vicinity of something else. But as they are not, because they're positioned, I mean, that's like with most artworks, it's a contextual issue. And so the tensions arise because of the context, or the positive tensions, I hope.
But I must say, I resonate very much with what you have just said. The papers in the issue I was curating obviously are not being graded, and I don't do that to my authors. But I do feel like there is some need to apply minimum framework and, let's say, rigor for the practical reasons, so that people do not stay too long in the shadow of how actually they should be working. And I take the liberty, if I am taking the responsibility as a, let's say, editor, running editor of the issue, I would also take a liberty of suggesting that the minimum rigor I would like to see in your work, in the paper, is that it communicates thoughts. It's about thoughts, it's about ideas. There are some questions in the call for papers, and I really would like to see and hear how your work tries to answer these questions. So in this way, I would notice some kind of difference maybe with, let's say, a very abstract sound art, which sometimes, because sometimes I am torn between this idea of listening and not intellectualizing this at all, just listening for the sake of some impressions running through my mind and through my body. But with the audio paper, I feel like it's very captivating to challenge people to try to communicate thoughts and ideas. So this provides a kind of a transition between, let's say, the traditional way of, okay, I have some question, I need to find the answer, I need to do some research, I need to think, I need to maybe organize, I need to do some thinking work, I need to think what I would like to communicate, how I imagine my work could be interpreted, perhaps. To apply this kind of minimum grading criteria slash because obviously I would never like to, let's say, reject a paper just because this or that. But if I would have noticed that it's maybe a little bit too elusive in terms of how does this communicate with the questions we have decided to put to the call for papers, maybe I would then try to negotiate with the author. What do you really mean? Maybe we can provide the short abstract where you complement with text what you express purely with sonic, etc., etc., etc.
But Marta, could you imagine being also, a PhD author? Could you imagine yourself actually grading audio papers?
Easily.
So what would be your criteria then?
First of all, I think I would suggest some time slots, but as I say, purely for practical reasons, so that students who have many different responsibilities don't need to get too anxious of what should they do. If somebody is very forthcoming with the idea of providing 2-day long work, maybe this is something we can work with. And I think I would grade it like a philosophical, maybe exam conversation, I don't know, paper, I wouldn't grade the quality of sound. Maybe we should say that out loud. I wouldn't grade the quality of sound. I wouldn't grade the quality of your recording because maybe it's on purpose. If I would notice something I hear as a kind of editing issue, maybe this is something we can learn, because I would see this as a learning chance that we can actually sit down with the software together and see how this works, which is very fascinating for me because I see sound editing very similar to text editing. I have been working as an editor. I really like it very much, this kind of organizing a puzzle type of work. So I think I would try to, if I was doing the course on the first meeting, I would try to explain that this is kind of a thinking exercise. Just like philosophy is an exercise in thinking, I would perhaps wish to have a course like this, that this is exercise in sonic thinking, and therefore we are trying to and what is gradable, I don't know, how you convince me you are right, maybe, or how you convince me your argument is, I don't know what word to use, but it's well studied, maybe. Like, I can see you did the work, something like, I'm like, improvising a little bit right now. But this is a great exercise in dreaming, as Salomé said before, that the editorial is kind of a dreamscape for you. I would say something like that, yes.
I think it's interesting that we're sort of moving, obviously due to the fact that the contributions from London Voices are by students. But having said that, there are obviously students who were then and are now already artists in their own right and makers in their own right, who just happen to study. And I think, well, I think there is something pedagogical, or let's say a potential for a collective pedagogy, because I think a lot of us could do, even long-standing professors could do with trying to make an audio paper simply in order to exactly get to that crack and get to that challenge and get to rethink the linearity of their thinking along lines of writing, again, in the time space of a sonic composition. I think it would be a great exercise to do with any level of teaching staff as much as with students, to be perfectly honest. And I would obviously, genuinely not to mark at all. I know that is another sort of fantasy, particularly in a monetized education system where marks are the payback for the money paid to a degree. I'm not trying to be too cynical, but that is a fact. Because I think the rigor, I love the word rigor, because projects like Audiopapers in a kind of more conventional education institution, university, are maybe seen sometimes as the soft option, as the easier option, when they clearly are not, because we are not trying to escape some academic rigor, but in actually the very opposite, be extremely rigorous, but be rigorous on the basis of plural knowledge. And I think that is where I also see Audiopapers, particularly within university institutions, as a feminist and decolonial strategy and method, because decoloniality within a Western institution cannot possibly be just adding some books to the reading lists. It's actually about changing the frameworks, changing most things. A lot of things we obviously don't have the capacity on the shop floor of teaching to do, but to really rethink, well, what do we actually call knowledge? How do we organize knowledge? How do we communicate this? And what are the possibilities for the individual students to bring their knowledge? Because we can't just assume they're a homogeneous group. And I think, David, that's why in the editorial you wrote about the tacit and about the student, and kind of how the audio paper opens that door to their knowledge.
Yes, it's being in the class and speaking to them. There's they have a tacit knowledge of how to use sound. They bring this. It can't be taught, and therefore, and it did seem distinct from what you were discussing, what you were talking about earlier, Salomé, about the about how people learn to do essays from school. People have a very different relationship with academic writing, and bringing sound means that they bring this knowledge that they have just got embodied in them, and they can bring this so naturally to their audio papers and use it without even thinking. And listening to the audio papers on the London Voices, how intelligent they are. Their use of sound is so intelligent in the way it enhances what they're doing, how it breaks up areas of what they're doing. It's just so clever, and I think that's something that nobody can teach. It's come from their from very young age, listening to sounds and music, and it is a very different knowledge that they're bringing to the class. You see, I also think that in relation to the context of the audio papers, and about how difficult it is to mark them and how difficult it is to have criteria that's placed on them, what I find, what I see as the kind of target is really, I guess, also the dissertations, because this is where the criteria are coming from. They've kind of been lifted from one to the other. There has to be parity within the university, and so if one could prise open the dissertations more into different areas and start some kind of change there, then the audio papers would, be able to exist more in the way that, say Marta, when I listened to the audio papers on your page, this short sound of wind, from Patagonia, there's such a variety, and contextualized by being audio papers. So I knew what I was listening to, but there was so much freedom to move about in there. And I think that would be, as I think Salomé has also expressed, be ideal. This is what we would like. And so I wonder about, how one can take these criteria away from dissertations. I was thinking about, because I come more from writing as a practice, and I was thinking about how when I read, when I research, when say, for instance, we do a collaborative piece of writing, or when I'm reading something for research, the sort of things that happen in the text, I don't see them as very different to listening to the sonic, or having a different space to the sonnet, because the sonnet gives a very particular space. But I also find that reading, what happens in my mind when I'm reading, and these little pockets of space open up when I'm reading, which distractions, daydreams, all kinds of things are happening in between the words, and to do with the font and to do with the material. There's so much happening which is not acknowledged as research, not acknowledged as what is usable. It's not part of the proposition one is demanded to make, and yet what goes on when you read is quite something. And I get very distracted, and I go down all kinds of little rabbit holes, and that's how I tend to write. And I think that if that was acknowledged as a sort of as part of research, I think you could enter spaces very similar to the sonic spaces of the audio papers, and therefore the criteria might be addressed.
I would like to, sorry, Antek, to interrupt you, but I really would like to call out Antoni, because in his PhD, he wrote something which would be very interesting in this context, that writing about sonic or like using the sonic imagination is very much a writing exercise. How can you describe all of those things which are happening when you are listening? How you can describe, how you can find words, maybe not necessarily in like written form, literally with pen on the paper, but maybe also in communication. So these connections between text and sound become very strong to me as well. I am not that much of an artist to be to get rid of the academic writing at all. So sometimes I imagine that perhaps people would think that the audio paper should replace, or like sonic thinking should replace written thinking, if I can say so. But I would say that they can coexist or like complement each other. And it only broadens the set of our skills that we have. So you nourish both of these skills in terms of how you communicate things about the world.
I think, I mean, this reminds me very much of I think it's the middle section of your audio paper trilogy, because yours is sort of organized like a trilogy. And the middle section is about literature. And so it's not, oh no, don't write a book, talk a book. I always feel like I'm not at all interested in some kind of sonic essentialism, or a kind of you must be blindfolded in order to hear better. I more think you could see more if you listen more. So it's actually more an invitation into a multi-sensory scape. That's why I also like Antek, your kind of idea, where is the border of audio papers? Could audio papers include objects, texts, maybe even smell and touch? Who knows? Kind of what else it could include as material that is also knowledge material, and that is material that we can use to communicate and rethink epistemologies that have organized themselves around I think a cultural visuality and maybe a cultural scholarship. That doesn't have to be that way. That doesn't mean we can't use writing. Not at all. It's just that we read it differently. Maybe we read it aloud. Maybe we read it like one year you did, David, when you had to mark all the dissertations by playing the guitar. Where we have to kind of sonify or perform it, dance it, move it. And I felt in your middle section on literature, listening is also collaborative voices. So there are two people working on this team together. It really made me want to read more. So the sound wasn't, oh, I'm only going to listen now. It was the very opposite. It was an invitation into reading, but a reading that included that body that had just spoken to me, that breath that they had in their voices, and the kind of rhythm and the sounds. So I so agree with that. It is not about one superseding the other or saying this is now not what we're doing anymore. It is more, and that's why I'm so happy that we're going to bring the seminars together again. It is actually about a contagion between the two and an implosion of all of that. And maybe we should have a kind of a moment where all the students bring their dissertation in and sing it while they play their instruments. To actually open that space of what happens when we hear it. Because there is something very organizational about visual language that we can get trapped in, I think, but that's maybe a slightly different issue. And I think audio papers can be a way to perform writing in a more open way. That can be useful if in the end I say, oh, like some students do, but I want to write a dissertation, but maybe we can still use the performative elements of the audio paper to free that up and to make us think, well, what sort of dissertation do we want to write then? Or what sort of book or scholarly writing do we want to produce?
That's interesting because, we used the Clarice Lispector quotes in the text. And the thing about Clarice Lispector, when you read her, you enter a kind of world which is very easy to draw something from. It's wonderful writing, in particular the one that started with slow leaping and this changing of the words. And it's interesting in contrast to something that I read the other day by M.F.K. Fisher, who is a food writer, very good food writer from the Cold War period, and critiqued the Cold War through her writing on cookery. But there's this quote about this woman who was foraging on the cliff tops to find herbs, and the problem was it was written very bluntly, and there was no access into that. And therefore, the only way to access that quote, to use that quote, to understand that quote, would be to go up onto a cliff and start foraging for herbs in order just to be able to engage with the quote, as opposed to this idea in writing where you have to be in the library and engage with a quote and use it. And so in what you're saying, Salomé, I think it's quite right that it's not even about audio and dissertation, it's about using the body to understand and the processes of both.
As a side note, I wanted to tell you, because I don't think I had an opportunity, that actually the Polish translation of Lispector's book was published, like, I don't know, 2 weeks before we got your essay. And actually we couldn't access it through the library, but our translator, Blaszontek, went to the bookstore and checked the quote in, fresh off the shelf. But I really wanted to focus on one particular thing, because I have this feeling that both, and actually I think that the three of you say a lot about the dynamics of epistemology and power. That it's always, now when we're talking, it's always between the lines. It turns back to that. And I have this feeling that the one through line of this batch of London voices is actually the different types of political, which is very, very important for us as I can proto announce that one of the issues of Glissando next year will be delving in such topics as well. So I really wanted to ask you about that, because I get this feeling from listening from you that actually the type of seminary and the discussions that you have with students sort of promote political issues, because you always tend to talk about power. And do you get the feeling that this is something that will come up also in next semesters and stuff during your seminary?
I don't think we necessarily talk about politics, but I think the students are very politically aware, very politically aware almost by necessity, because the times are difficult. And I don't know, I mean, certainly on this audio paper module, I don't feel myself politicizing all that much, but I think maybe, a politics of aesthetics is being discussed, because we're talking about a different paradigm and an emerging paradigm. And so obviously that invites new and critical thought to find a new place. But I wouldn't say, David, what do you think? Are we very political?
It's interesting, because I think the whole structure of CRISAP, the research center is political, or political. I mean, it has some fascinating subjects that it researches that I think are very current. The work, the professors are doing work that is fascinating and political. And so I think this is something that is a great strength of LCC Sound Art, in my opinion, and that's not a promotional. I genuinely think that, and I think that in that sense it's in the air. But I also agree with Salomé that the students really have their own mind. They really come with something that is new, and you have to listen to them. They're really clued up on things that, you know, are so important. And I think that, so for instance, at the beginning, when they're giving their titles of what they want to study, nobody's saying it's this or that. You just get given their title and you work with them on that. So it is, so there's no literal influence. I think that yeah, so it is. I think it's coming from them. I think it's very much coming from them. There has been times, I remember one time we had a very particular political teacher, and there was a time when a lot of the students would come with questions that you could see directly came from the teacher, you know, and their own radical politics, which so you got quite a batch of very particular questions, but this at the moment it's coming, I think, from the students. I don't think, you know, we have our own interests, you know, which infiltrate one's speaking and timbre. But sorry.
I just wanted to notice that there might be a very interesting discrepancy between us as we use English language and, let's say, Polish language, because in Polish language we have developed two different notions which I can't really translate to English. So the one is politics understood as, you know, guys in suits making decisions in the government, and the other, which is something like political, being more open and just suggesting that it's all about things we do in public, things we do between each other. And in this way, we could say that everything is political, while not everything is politics, perhaps. And it's not sometimes clear to me myself, because to say that everything is political sounds very radical, and you need to be able to defend that. And I'm not always capable of doing that. But in this way, I would suggest that audio papers do invite political, because they make the conversation more plural, and they make the conversation more diverse. And in this regard, they invite more ideas and more conflicting ideas, but not in this negative meaning that there's some fight and violence, but like just difference or discrepancy, which doesn't have to lead to compromise, doesn't have to lead to shared view, but with this idea that we can just meet and confront these ideas. So whether this is something about some let's say groups of society, like some subcultures, which become the theme of the paper, or whether this is about how we remember things, like socially speaking, let's say, or how we use memory to nurture some collective things which constitute our identity. In this respect, I would say everything is political, right? So it's a very, very interesting difference, I would say. And I would be very much looking forward to the upcoming Glissando issue on political, because I would like to see how you tackle this then.
And how would you let's say delineate the main axis of politicality of sound sonic patterns?
I'm thinking perhaps once again, I am kind of improvising right now, but perhaps we can add to the conversation the idea whether audio papers do something with us. So whether they implement new ideas, whether they prompt a conversation. And I think I am saying this because I'm circling back to this idea of communicating thoughts. So perhaps this is where this conversation becomes more and more open. And I wanted to say that maybe the line is between whether you choose a little bit more, let's say, social topics. So you want to talk about what you see around yourself. On the other hand, perhaps you would like to talk about more of your inner life, because this is a strategy I also sometimes notice. So people become very self-centered in their like artistic or academic work, but I'm saying it in a neutral tone, just to focus on themselves as something they are most acquainted with, let's say. But I think it's a very, very difficult question to be honest. I really kind of struggle to answer that right now, but saving for later maybe.
Okay, so let me rephrase it, because I want to pinpoint a little bit, Marta, here. Because when you were saying about sound archives and sonic archives, maybe this is the moment to answer this question. How, what do you as a running editor of this issue understand as a sound or sonic archive, and how does it differ between different cultures?
So maybe the answer to your question is that the archive is political. And therefore, if you do the work on the archive, it becomes political, because I understand it as a way of collecting things. So the idea of collecting seems to be the core, also seems to be the joint theme of, I think, most of the works in the issue. And if you collect, the question arises, why do you do this? What for? What are you collecting? What are you going to do with the collection that you hold? And even if you collect something for private, you collect, let me refer to like the traditional archive. You collect photographs, I don't know, souvenirs, pieces, which you hold some memories to. The question is, do you keep them private or do you share them with other people? So in this way, there is always some questions to be asked yourself. It's not only like keeping things to yourself. And when you're translating it to the audio paper format, I would say then things become interesting, because you need to at least try to answer these questions. And I think I will be from now on borrowing what you guys wrote in the editorial to London Voices, that questions can be practiced, not necessarily answered. This is how I understand it. So it's a very like refreshing perspective to me, that I can just practice some questions. And I give myself liberty to somehow end the practice, unless I can provide a sufficient answer to them.
I find it interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
I just wanted to go back to the the political. I mean, it is in the English language, and I'm not a native speaker, but it's political, and there's politics. So there's politics, and it can be party politics, and it's the kind of organized politics, but political. And I do think, of course, everything in many ways is political, but I think it's worthwhile maybe pinning it down a little bit more to get a handle on it. And it was interesting because as you were talking, I saw Yusuf, who is one of the authors of London Voices, wrote about this thing that the audio paper, because it makes you think about where you are within the thing, like you said, where you are within the archive. All of a sudden, you don't just archive as a kind of a method, that's a conventional method, but with an audio paper you start to rethink the archive. And I think what he's suggesting, and where I really agree with, once you kind of leave the dissertation and opt for the audio paper, you have to think, where am I in this? Because in a dissertation, in a scholarly text, on the whole, there is a place for you. A place is carved out, very often still, unfortunately, in the third person singular, which I find a very awkward place to write from or with. I never do that hides authority, and that, but you can join the club of writers when you write in that person, that, you know, where, I don't know, that's a different subject. Whereas in the audio paper, all of a sudden, that place isn't so assured. You have to invent it. You have to find it. And I believe what Yusuf is saying is that makes you think about your subjectivity, about your identity. And so it becomes political, not only because you might have chosen a political subject, but also because the format demands you to reflect on your political subjectivity, on your democratic autonomy, on who you are. And I think that is that's one of the things I like about the audio paper, that it does bring certain norms, certain conventions into doubt, and they have to be reinvented. And like we say with the archive, which is such a super interesting topic, like not only what's in the archive, but what is not in the archive, and who can I go into the archive, and do I have the access to the archive, or do I need to have a special pass or something? So subjectivity becomes very important in an archive, which seems sort of counterintuitive when you think, well, it's just catalogs and cartons and boxes that are labeled with in alphabetical order, when actually no, archives are very much about subjects and how we choose to organize the world.
So let me ask you the follow-up, because I was wondering, do you approach curating such course as a production of Sonic Archive?
I don't know. I mean, personally, that's not, you know, I have a lot of issues with archives. We have a great archive, the Hernois archive. It's a Chris Sepp archive that I appreciate very much, because it's a feminist archive on sound. But even there, I sometimes think, yeah, but as soon as we archive it, we don't perform it anymore. We put it into boxes, we label it, we put it away, then it goes in a catalog. I have to put on white gloves and go into a verified atmosphere to look at it. But it's kind of an archiving sometimes is the beginning of death. But I think with what you've done, Marta, with having an archive represented, or the archive rethought through the medium of audio paper, reperforms it, rebrings it out, because I felt it was interesting. There wasn't so much in there for me about archives. It was more a performance of particular things that were not put to bed or put to death. They were actually lived, performed, alive. So it was very alive.
And
Yeah,
that's,
thank you for bringing it up. And I also wanted to say one thing out loud, that the papers are not archives. Do you know what I mean? That the papers are on the archives, on the idea of archive, but I have never until this moment thought of them as the archive themselves. Obviously, some of them collect interesting material which would have never been maybe collected otherwise. But in a way, when you produce a traditional academic paper, you collect your sources. We also don't think that this is the archive. This is like the collection of sources I'm using because I would like to express an idea that I have. For example, if I can use one of the examples from the Sound Archive issue, there is a paper. There was a very nasty thing in Warsaw this summer. So for some reason, birds started to like die in the city. There were some reasons for that, and one of the paper by Agata Dyczko tackles this situation, tackles this problem, and her archive are the Facebook comments. So people were outraged, people were disoriented, people were demanding answers. What is happening that you see birds falling from the sky really in the city? So her archive material, let's say, are these Facebook comments, and she's reading them out loud as they are. She's performing them, as you say. as they are, with all the imperfections of spoken to written, also the context of how we write Facebook comments specifically, and so on and so on, the quite magnitude of the source material, let's say. So the great value of works like this is that they do actually put this together. So in this way, they become kind of a collection holders, if I can say so. But if I was to set up a sound archive, perhaps I would have used different strategies, because I would have to think about different things. I would have to think about all of these boxes and white gloves, how to translate them or adapt them, or maybe think of something entirely different. So I just wanted to say that, but this is my interpretation also as a listener of these works now, not necessarily the running editor, that I have never thought of them as the archive themselves, more like the work on the archive. And I was also too very happy and very like humbled with this idea that all of the authors like brilliantly answered the questions in the call for papers. So this is very often about what is not in the archive, or what the archive is not, or what the archive could be or could have been, with all the, you know, like tense grammatical tense possibilities. So that was very, very rewarding, and I hold a lot of gratitude for this project, because you know how it works. You can expect things, you can not expect things, but I was very, very happy with all the works that become the part of this project.
I think, yeah, this is it's interesting what you said about the archive and the white gloves. When I looked at read the text from these audio papers, and I was really fascinated by some of the archives that have been set up, including the Facebook one of the crows and the Patagonian winds, and this doesn't seem to have the same. This seems to be very important action to save these things and to collect these things in a way that is different to a normal understanding of an archive. And I also think that it's where it's placed online is also very different, because you don't put white gloves on to go online, and there is a more fluid flow, more fluid linking of things together. And I wonder also whether, you know, I know there's some questions about some archives, and I wonder whether archives can change over time because they remain still, and therefore things move past them, and therefore it's not the same. It doesn't have the same political. Don't want to use that word again, but it doesn't have. It doesn't have its immediacy that it did have over time. And yeah, these so maybe that does affect archives, and that's built into the name, that it's, you know, it's kept over time. But looking at the ones that are on you know, that have been included on your page, they seem very, very important and very alive, and like archiving things that people don't want you to archive, and, you know, bring up subjects which are very alive today, and rethink ways of looking at, say, geography, like in the Patagonian winds. It's fascinating how the text related to that, and what is held in wind. You know, it's not just the country that, you know, this is what I think one of the phrases from the book that was linked to it was, there's nothing here but the wind, you know, but this shows that that's not the case, and that this is a new geography as well, and a new possibility from understanding around. So it does have a very different function to one's association with archives as, you know, something you visit in the British Museum, you know, from ages ago.
as we're talking for over an hour, I have a whole list of other subjects. But maybe this is the right moment to open the discussion and ask for questions for our guests from our guests, but I mean public guests. So if anybody would like to ask a question, maybe this is the accurate
Maybe
moment.
let's say that you can, I don't know, write them in chat.
Yeah,
Or,
I can. Yeah,
or
I
say
can. I
out
can
loud
read it.
as
Yeah.
you wish, or say out loud as you wish.
There was one question from Anna Horodinska. I am trying to find it in the conversation. Or maybe, Anya, you would like to speak up with your question? I'm not sure she's still with us, so let me find the question.
Mhm.
So maybe while waiting for Anya, I would like to ask one question. Hello, everyone, and thank you for everything you shared. I wonder also, this question comes from my experience of writing, recording an audio paper for Glissando. It was a number about sound ecology, and what I've discovered, and maybe what is important, I'm not a sound artist. I'm a choreographer who, from time to time, pretend to be a sound artist. I'm more a dancer and a somatic educator. So I'm one of them who is discovering new tools and new sensibilities thanks to the open call by Glissando. But what I discovered while recording the paper, and it's kind of linking to what you shared before about new types of the knowledge that is created through the audio paper, that it's maybe different than the one that we tend to produce, share at the academia. Or it's refreshing to the academia. What I notice is that thanks to this invitation, I also was writing the paper differently. And for me, it means that I was going with a sound recorder to different soundscapes and different places in Warsaw. And my question to you would be, knowing the different papers and your students, and what types of embodied, like new embodied ways of writing or recording appeared for you? Yeah, like how people use their bodies or how they write, because I imagine that we can do it near, like in front of the computer or in front of the desk, like writing with a pen or with a laptop, but we can do it differently. And I'm curious what's your take on that, or what you discovered.
Thank you, Alicia. I have a very straightforward answer. I think it's enough to just go out. And I say it as a person who enjoys staying at home and enjoys being in this kind of a library setup. But I am kind of proud of myself when I was teaching some sound studies course at the university, and I came up with this question to my students: can you do sound studies in a library solely? Or perhaps it is about going out, going on a sound walk, moving your body to places you want to study or research, and just being more in the world, as opposed to being in the library, not to mention the ivory tower of academia. So sometimes this very simple, or perhaps, sometimes it's not that simple to just go out to people outside, I don't know, in the city. And I noticed that in the sound archive papers as well, that for many of them, you need to go out and be in a place where you, which you want to research. And I think interesting example here would be the paper on the cemetery soundscape. You want to collect the sounds which are in the cemetery or around the cemetery. You want to conceptualize them. You want to think of how this cemetery scape differs from perhaps the cityscape, but it quite literally means that you need to be there for quite some time. And perhaps this sounds banal, but I do feel some kind of depth into this. Like you need to be there. Perhaps you need to like shut your voice. Perhaps you just need to be silent for some time and then absorb the sounds you study while or before you press the record button on the device that you're using. Or if not, if you're just using your imagination to like store the sounds that you are analyzing, just like be there in this kind of meditative mode. And we know, I think I can assume that more or less we know this from all the concepts of attention listening or like this kind of, I'm missing words. This kind of meditative listening, there is a lot of articles and methods on that already.
Yeah, I think with there's quite a few different things that I could think of, but one of the things that struck me about the audio papers was the addition of friendship that happened in a number of them. I think you can hear it on Kai Pritchard. He has clearly a friend there with him who's helping him, and they're discussing and they're laughing. There's an intimacy about that. A very serious subject he was researching, but this additional friendship that came into it was really lovely and a wonderful way to go about researching, and very different to the experience of a library and the isolated sense of being on one's own. And there was another one that isn't here that was from last year, which was also striking because it was the student and his friend talking, laughing. You know, it was really a very beautiful addition to seeking knowledge, and that's one that really struck me recently as being and it reminded me a little bit of the Clarice Lispector quote again about how to the great unfinding, this idea that in order to go forward, she that one needs a hand. She imagines somebody holding her hand, and I think audio papers enable us to literally hold somebody's hand and be part of this research with somebody and with friends. And so that seemed to me a nice addition.
We do have a few questions, but maybe let's start with Emery Kuchawa that raised hand.
Hey everybody, thanks for having this session. And can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for having this session. Very interested. I'm coming from live in New Jersey. I work at Teachers College, Columbia University. I had a audio paper in the seismograph issue last year, so that's kind of what's brought me into this great community of scholars. So appreciate this and learning a lot more from being here. I have a question, or curious to hear your thoughts about how audio papers as a genre or even designed entity can circulate and be useful to other scholars in completing their own scholarship. And I guess the way I'm thinking about it, I don't necessarily think audio papers as a genre have to function the same way as text, but I think back and forth about what each of these afford as a way to try to understand how they work. So I think about with text, how the design of text in, say, PDF written articles allow for scholars to enter into them in certain ways and to be useful in completing their own scholarship. So what I mean is that I think sometimes scholarship circulates because it's useful for me as a scholar to complete my work, right? Like I'll quote something, it has a reference page, I'll learn new things I need to read or can read because of the citations or the reference page. Even I can grab the text, paste it into mine, address it, step back, make my own arguments through relationship with that text. And I don't think audio papers have to do the exact same thing, but I wonder how, working within that genre, they can open themselves up so that scholars can enter into them and engage them for completing their own scholarship. And I think for me that's important because that's a way that audio papers can circulate even further, rather than being these kind of like closed boxes that we're like impressed by, like, this is amazing, how did you do this? And then that it kind of stops right there. So it's just something I'm thinking a lot about right now and don't really have answers to. So I just offer that as a question for us to think together.
It's interesting you say it doesn't have to fit into the sort of quote, the citation, the kind of citation roster of, yeah, I can just cite that little bit and then I put it in my essay. Because I think I like that resistance of audio paper towards the citation, because it's more demanding. You have to listen to the audio paper. And then I think you could still cite it. You could still paraphrase it. All that still goes. But how do you paraphrase a whole soundscape? Because it's not just the words that somebody's speaking, but it's about what sounds going with them. Or how do you paraphrase one of the wind sounds? How do you? And so I think I like how it brings different knowledge and different knowledge positions. And it also questions that easy citation, because citations can be quite an easy way of legitimizing and an easy way of reaching out when actually maybe I haven't really read that text. I don't really understand what they're saying, but I'm having it because it kind of makes my argument easier and it's kind of neat and it works and it kind of catches you out. I think audio papers catch you out because you have to spend more time with them. They're as long as they are. Okay, some might be a minute long, some might be 24 hours long. So it's a different commitment. It's slowing down. It's literally slowing down. The acceleration of this really, really fast recycling that academia is, and that obviously now AI is on super speed, because AI is nothing but a quotation machine. It grabs what's there and it puts it together in a new way. There's no intelligence in there. It's just pattern recognition and repatterning. And I think even in that respect, the audio paper is interesting because the AI has to work harder to take anything out of it, to recycle it. And I think as humans, we will have to develop means to resist the AI extraction that is happening at the moment on human bodies and human minds and human actions. So yeah, we have to then find new ways. How do we work with? How do we find these collaborations and the scholarly community with an audio paper community? But I mean, Glissando clearly is one way to go, because there are resources being built up for other people who want to research and write, and that's what we need.
It's interesting, the citation. People can cite. This is the way canons are established and kept in place as well. And what I find about the audio papers, we listen to them in class, and the students really want to hear other audio papers for various reasons. And one of the things that I've found about those sessions where we listen is how much there is to talk about in short samples of audio papers so much, whereas if you did the equivalent of writing, you know, it would have to be a very different text. You know, as I said, dissertation, I think, could be opened up in this way. But at the moment, the audio papers, there's so much that you could take from a short clip that it's also very difficult to cite it on that basis, because you use it in very many different ways. And also what I find interesting about the circulation of audio papers is whether they, I find a big difference to listening to an audio paper through headphones, which is one of the main ways I assume people listen to audio papers, and listening to them in a group situation. And I find the group situation of listening to audio papers very different and very exciting, to the point where I've been trying to think of, you know, opening up reading sessions in the sort of old style of how before social media and before this, that people would go and visit a house and read, and maybe use a microphone and read to each other, and finding ways of opening up text in that way, and maybe as opposed to looking at a print of it. So yeah, I think that's one of the things about. So it would be nice to have, so not only the classroom where it's circulated and kept as an archive for students to look at, because that's important, but also a public place like Glissando. But also it would be really nice if there were places where people could meet and listen, you know, to these papers in the same way they used to go to houses and listen to somebody reading the latest chapter of their book.
We did when we did promo meeting around previous audio paper issue. We did play snippets of a few audio papers, and actually when we this year with Marta, we were together at the Audionomia conference in Łódź, which is very interesting because it's a conference for radio documentaries, and there we presented snippets as well. However, I just realized, listening to you, that I don't think we ever conducted audio papers listening sessions or something like that, which could be fascinating. And it also shows how much we can still play with the practices of how we listen to what is being produced. I actually think this is fairly underdeveloped and under-theorized aspect of audio papers, to be honest. So thank you very much for what you just said. Marta, would you like to comment on that as well?
Maybe very briefly, because maybe we could invite more questions to the table. I just wanted to refer to this, how papers could more circulate. For me, the most important is the inspiration. So I get inspired by the ideas that the different audio papers present, and this is how I incorporate them into my own research. Going back to this example of Cemetery audio paper by Lena Achterling, she has this idea that the archive is not only to keep the memory, but also to forget. The idea of forgetting is very interesting in her work. So I am very much inspired in that. Perhaps I will be working on a similar topic. I intend to make her work circulate, let's say, by just getting inspired by what she suggested. But as I say, maybe we can invite more questions.
So maybe I will read the first one from the chat section, right? I was wondering about how we usually think an audio paper as a whole in itself. Would it make sense to speak of creating or translating an audio paper version from an essay of us from the past, or a paper made by another person? Considering how a key aspect, as has been said, is that it is an embodied sonic thinking, or on the challenge to make an audio essay with other people. I would just like to briefly comment and maybe ask you to say at this point, if you work with audio paper authors with some kind of written scripts before they start recording, because I have feeling this is connected to this question.
I have only ever done one audio paper myself, funny enough, or maybe two. Actually, maybe two. One was more of an audiovisual paper. And I did that with Mark Peter Wright, and we did not do a script at all. We came from the sounds. So the sounds we had recorded on a particular theme guided the way through, rather than a script. But I can also understand how you would want to do a script. I actually think that last year, as part of the hand-in, a script at one point was required or was made by the students. But I think the question here, as I understanding, the word that sticks out for me is the translating of an existing essay into an audio paper or an audio essay. And I think that's because it's an interesting word, because maybe I wouldn't say translating, which sort of suggests a one-to-one, but more of a sort of unfolding, maybe an unfolding of an essay into an audio essay, to maybe think through the writerly space into its sonic and architectural and resonant spaces, and how what is missing, maybe what is missing when we only read, or maybe what I hear when I read it, and therefore how I would reenact or perform a certain text. So yes, I think that'd be quite a funny, an interesting exercise in taking a text, maybe even one's own text written a while ago, maybe, and sort of remembering, replacing, reinventing the soundtrack, the kind of the unfolding of that knowledge into sound, and then, but then not to expect that it is translation, a literal, this is the same just in sound, but that actually the surprise that could be there of everything that could happen additionally and in paradox and complexly by doing that.
Yes, I think it sounds like a wonderful idea to use essays from other people and from the past and making an audio paper from them, because of how this would open up the essays in a completely different and maybe often personal way.
Sorry, Natalia, can you take care of this?
Yeah, sure. Let me identify the culprit.
Shall I continue?
Yes.
Okay, so it reminds me of, well, firstly, what Salomé said earlier, and Marta actually, about it being the context being that it is an audio paper, and so you approach it with that, so that there's no rule as to what an audio paper can actually be, and that one explores that under the kind of context of making an audio paper. But I think for me, it sounds like such an interesting way to get into a text, to reopen it. I mean, I'd only say what Salomé said is probably the same thing, but it does remind me of how how the reading process, it would bring out aspects of the reading process and magnify some of those moments in reading that we ignore when we are trying to present a text, cite a text or use a text for a propositional essay. And so when I talked about what I was aware of going on when I'm reading, and how that is not the same as being able to translate that into a citation, that there's so many different things going on that one could be aware of when reading. This would be a way to really explore that. And I mean, I find that very exciting idea, this translating text that way in an audio paper context.
And perhaps I can add one more thing to this, because I believe we are circling around this idea that the limitations are very low. You can really take the liberty on how you shape your audio paper. For example, in the question here we have about the challenges of making an audio essay with other people. And obviously you can do this with other people. And here I would suggest thinking about, if so many things are possible, I would suggest thinking about the decisions you need to make as an author while you shape your work, and perhaps be able to explain to your audience, whether this is a classroom audience or public meeting while we promote the issue, just to be able to maybe give some context to the decisions that you have made. So for example, if you choose to create your audio paper in a group of 10 people, perhaps you could be able to provide some insight into why specifically you have chosen to do that. And if there is no reason for your decisions whatsoever, maybe this is also something we can use as a topic for the conversation. And this is something really helped me with making and curating audio papers. This one piece of direction which just helps me navigate and organize my own work. So when I'm creating, when I am thinking of an audio paper that I make as an author, I'm just trying to think of all the tiny decisions, whether this is a decision to include or not include something, but also whether this is a decision of what kind of sound effect I am using and why specifically this one. Why am I dismantling the source material in this particular way? Just to help me, with moving the work forward. So I would just to wrap it up, I would say many things are possible, but perhaps be able to give insight to your decision-making process.
I just wanted to add that actually I made looked it up, and in most of our issues there were some collaborative audio papers, which probably, I mean, the collaborations were different, but we did have something that was more akin to, let's say, hybrid form between audio essay and interview. We did have some forms that were prepared as a collaborative idea, with one person being focused probably more on the recording stuff and the other person on the text of the narrative, I would say, of the paper. But it probably can take many different forms, especially if we expand into this hybrid forms of audio papers. We do have one question about lines delineating art, sound, and audio paper. However, I'll be honest, I think that I was infusing such question into our main discussion. So let me move on to next question. How do you see the possibility of colonizing social science, including political science, with audio papers, when the whole system is designed for clarity, performance management, publish or perish culture, reporting and strict regulations regarding curricula. So probably yes. How do you see this possibilities of audio papers when it comes also to social science, including political?
I see this possibility as making Salomé's and David editorial mandatory to read to everybody and each and every person here, because it's such a brilliant piece of text which tackles exactly that, so that we are allowed to be vague, we are allowed to be unspecific. We don't need to answer all the questions. And I experienced that recently first-handed when I was giving some conference presentation, whatever. And I just said that I don't know many things. And I had like a bunch of very vague thoughts, because quite independently in a different scholarly text, I also found this theme of academic vagueness as something not only beneficial, but kind of necessary in the thinking process. And as silly as it may sound, people were approaching me afterwards and saying, thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that we don't need to be sure of the things. Thank you for saying that we can be uncertain in the work that we do. I come from history science, let's say, history discipline. So I don't have this much experience with, let's say, political science and their rigor or things they are used to do. But this paper on sonic vagueness, or like academic vagueness, for me is so inspiring that I really would encourage everybody to just start there and like rethink their life with it. Like, do I really have to make myself subject to this publish or perish culture, for instance? So I really wanted to say that, because I'm so like grateful for this piece that you provided here, that I really will stay with me for a long time.
Can I just add, because I mean, thank you first of all, Marta, of course, and I think it's an interesting question, because I actually did, as part of a research project, work with social scientists who work with social exclusion data. And obviously they're very sure about the data, or at least the data looks very sure, because you get a graph, you get statistics, you can read it all, it's got data, it's got numbers, it got figures. But what we did is we worked with sound, now not with an audio paper, but with sonification. There's a sonification designer called Sandra Poletto. And what we realized was that there wasn't enough data to sonify. There simply wasn't enough data to sonify. And so what I found was so interesting was that the visual, I wouldn't call it a lie, but it was an illusion. It was an illusion propped up by some algorithm that filled the gaps in the data set to make it look complete and certain and clear. I don't think social sciences are social sciences. They're social arts or social humanities. Let's call them that. Because the data sets, I think there isn't enough money really to make great data sets on most things that they're researching. And they're just kind of inventing the gaps of what they don't have. But they present it to us in this visual, confident style. And so I think audio thinking, sonic criticality, and maybe other tools too, but this one as one example can actually show us that they are speculative. They're just not celebrating their speculativeness. And we could, because actually it would maybe be more positive, because on their data sets, on their visualizations, policy decisions are then made, and it becomes politics, a very certain politics on very wobbly data sets. And I think we might have better politics if we would have a more speculative political approach in the making of that stuff.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience about this field, except my father was a very clever scientist who discovered a lot of things, and he was very aware of the parts of his research which were inexplicable or unexplainable. He put a lot of stock into the creative aspect of that, therefore the fuzzy, the vague, and as Salomé is saying, I think a lot of that is cut out and left out and filled in, quickly filled in. And I think that is a very interesting aspect that, as I say, I don't know the field, but I can imagine that is, as Marta said, the essay would apply to that field as well, going by, what I picked up from listening to my own personal experience of a scientist, and and I guess that's the encouragement that the one that I had to go into art from that, because I didn't get the difference. Wasn't brought up with the difference. I was brought up with this is the same. And then of course you then come into life and you realize that some people are saying it isn't, and you're thinking, yeah, but it is. It's you're making something up. This isn't honest. And so yeah, I'd just say that yeah, I agree with both Marta and Salomé on that.
The next question is about source.
Andrzej, sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to check how are we feeling, because it's been like 2 hours already. Do we think that we want maybe like 1 or 2 questions, or?
I think there are 2 or 3 left at this point. One. I think that's the last one I have just said. Oh, wait.
There was one from Anya, which I've managed to find.
Okay. So we have one from Anya, and there is one from Janek. I just wanted to a little bit to rephrase it a little bit and combine it with because it's about sources and quotations, but you spoke a little bit about quotations, so I wanted to rephrase it a little bit, but I don't think anymore. So that would be 2 more questions. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't want anybody to feel left out, but I just like feel I need to take care of us.
So let me ask this question that because Janek wrote, how do you think the source functions in audio papers? In written academic papers, there is a long tradition on quoting and commenting. In audio medium, however, the border between the source and comment is blurred. For example, in juxtaposition of sounds and narrative, or some intonation or recording tricks, like the ones Marta used in her piece on Fast Track Radio Factory, which is very interesting. And I wanted to tweak it a little bit, because actually this is something very important when we talk about audio papers and sound studies and different academic forms of utilizing sound. What kind of sources are we talking about? Because are we talking only about audio sources per se, as Salomé just said about sonification, for example? Is it does in how in which ways different types of sources can function in audio papers, and what are the challenges maybe while approaching it? I know it's a broad question, but
But honestly, this is the question I'm being asked the most when I'm talking about audio papers: how to cite, how to mark, not only how I can cite audio paper, but how I can mark citations within my paper. And honestly, I haven't reached this question fully yet. I can just give you some ideas of solutions that I noticed or that I used myself. For example, I'm using different type of voice, or once I used AI generated voices which were reading the passage from the book, because I wanted to differentiate from my voice to the voice of the other author, perhaps. It worked in English because that was the moment. I'm not sure it wouldn't have worked with the Polish at that time yet. I think that because, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, but with the Harvard citation system, you literally just put the name and the year of the person. This is not that detailed as we in Polish, especially history, sometimes do very, very detailed description of the piece that you quote. So I took kind of inspiration from that. I just tried to say out loud the name of the author that I'm referencing to. And here I am using the liberty of the website format, that I just put the bibliography together with my paper. So I just hope that if the person listens and hears the name, then in the bibliography they can find the, for example, book that I am referring to. But I'm kind of ditching the question because I just haven't come up with satisfying for me solutions yet, really.
Yeah, it's also contingent on the audio paper as well. That if it's literally about how do you cite, if that's the question, on how do you source, what we say is that, because obviously it's a question because of plagiarism and such like, and we don't have a set way of doing it. And like Marta said, is there you got rules of thumb that you can use, but I think it depends on each audio paper needs to make that, the author has to make that decision themselves, which is quite nice. I've heard audio papers where it's not clear at all who said what, and these are published. And I've heard audio papers where there is no apparent referencing and sourcing, and yet they're there in the bibliography, and the whole dramaturgy of it, it's again, it's a requirement, and that's we try to make it as open and as creative and as interesting as possible. But it's funny that it's a requirement, and I can sort of understand the requirement, but I also wonder what a world would be like with just voices. I mean, the names can be underneath, and I think, as I said, I did find it, on the one hand, when I heard this audio paper, frustrating that I didn't know who said what. And it was a very good audio paper. It was peer reviewed. I think that's the way to say it. And then, and so I found it frustrating, but then I found it exciting, because then I started trying to trace the voices and finding the voices and working out, and I don't know, it became a bit of a puzzle for me. I don't know if I got too little to do with my time, but I found it really very interesting to be given that extra engagement with it. And to make it more interesting, the voice was always the same. So you could get no clue from the voice. And it was clearly a decision made by the author. But I found it, after the initial and irritation, I found it very interesting.
I just wanted to add that at the Glissando website, there was a moment when we had the radio audition on the waves of Radio Capital, and it was in 2019, and the initial batch of our episodes, and we always published it with sort of footnotes published on our website, trying to expand the format of live radio audition with things that we can add later while publishing the stream, the file at our website. So there are always ways to create those hybrid forms when things can be quoted and linked, and the knowledge can be connected. So yeah, I think that Janek also meant a little bit about source, because I would be very interested to talk, but probably at a later point on our next meeting, to talk a little bit how can Audiopapers utilize I don't know, visual sources or tactile sources or olfactory sources. This is also a fascinating topic that we could be, talking next. So, Natalia, could you read that question from Anya?
Yes, and I do have feeling that the answer would be a really great summary of our conversation, because Anya wrote something like that. You said that Audiopapers in academy provokes to redefine scholarly engagement, essay, paper, or just to wonder what it is. How working with Audiopapers changed your definition?
For me, I am becoming just increasingly excited. There's a growing excitement in me. I like everything. I am fascinated by everything. And I do this on purpose because I would like to nurture my own curiosity. So obviously there is the devil on my shoulder, being very practical and trying to be critical in this positive way, giving critical feedback and engaging in the conversation. But I am in a point where right now I just am getting extremely excited by the variety of ideas, approaches. I may have some comments or questions to very specific solutions or decisions, but I have never approached an audio paper or I have never encountered an audio paper which made me irritated in the way that the classic academic journal paper would make me irritated. Do you know what I mean? So I would like to dwell on that for a moment, because I sometimes feel like, especially when I was, for example, doing a PhD, there was not much joy in this academic process, for instance. So what I like about this formula is that it expands in a way that is just fascinating and marvelous to me. Obviously, after that, there will be my era of trying to put this more together and perhaps create my own rigor and be a little bit more strict in this, once again, positive and hopefully helpful way. Because, for instance, and that would be maybe last comment, I too thought that before I had thought that audio papers should be mainly sonic, but the authors themselves suggested the great photographic material, the great poetry, right, or some other literary forms, and I just couldn't help myself to like reject that. For instance, go to the paper by Agnieszka Liniak and Monika Glasowicz, which is based on oral history interviews. And the ladies which were being interviewed shared their archive family photographs. This is such a valuable gesture that you make your marriage photograph from 1950 public under, you know, academic scrutiny. And the more, the better for me. So here I put the full stop maybe to this comment.
I think for me, it's not a finished process of being inspired or rethinking. I think it helps me to rethink writing and to also imagine writing in a more space-time dimension, so that it's not a kind of moving on the page and putting things together, because I think the page can catch us out, that we start to make a puzzle of a precise language, and it becomes sort of intertextual, that we get excited. I can get very excited sort of by an intertextual writing that is about how words are neat together and how the text is neat. And I think that has a value, and that is, I don't want to take that away. I think one can even make poetry out of that when it's about language, doing language and being the practice of language. But at the same time, what I like about the audio papers is the challenge off the page into the space. And that, I think, compositionally, so that the two audio papers I did do, I didn't write anything down really. It was about composing recordings in a way that made an audio paper. So I think it brings an element of composition meant as in its broadest possible interpretation to writing, and therefore can kind of implode it a bit, open it up, maybe its own introspection can be opened up, and I think that is one of the aspects I really appreciate for myself.
Yeah, this I must say I picked up on that sentence of the audio papers don't irritate me as much as some academic texts can, and I thought about that because I thought that that's what I find difficult about some texts within the context of the academy is the certainty that is, they are able to write such certainty, and it feels quite bullying sometimes, and very claustrophobic and difficult. And, you know, I can't really make sense of such certainty that the academic text can offer, that can give that platform, that ability. You know, it's really honed for that kind of certainty, and it's very difficult. And the people who I like reading they've already built something into it which diffuses that and creates doubt and speculation. And but it is a platform that would encourage certainty, and that I find difficult about that. And it's nice that audio papers, I also have not heard an audio paper that irritates me. I've heard audio papers that initially I'm trying to get my head round, but then really enjoy and really can tune into them. And in that way, I think, like Salomé said, this is very important. They're compositions in a sonic way, and they are working they have so many different things going on, and they don't have that certainty that, from my experience, because the sonic does destabilize certainty. And you know, even with somebody like Juice, who kind of delivers in quite a kind of traditional way, you listen to it, it's fantastic. It's, you know, it's a cacophony of real joy, and it flips from one space and time to another. You know, this is a very different experience than reading an academic paper. It's quite something. But that's what it's helped me. It's helped me to understand. And in this context, it's wonderful because that means there's possibility for a new way of thinking.
So I think it's, let me start a little bit of wrapping up our meeting. I think it's time to say that I'm especially grateful for the possibility of financing those two audio papers, because those two audio papers projects, because in the end we were able to publish them, and although there were many twists and turns about financing them, we got support from London College of Communication, University of Arts. We got support from the Ministry of Polish Culture. We got support from Goethe Warsaw, which became crucial, and also from Polskie Centrum Kultury, which was especially important for Marta's issue, and we have two special audio papers because of that. And I think this, and also, yes, Janek says that that also our readers through crowdfunding, and readers and listeners through crowdfunding, and we were able to produce those audio papers, and to make them full-fledged bodies of works. I'm really happy that they are standing on their own as issues, or that can be, put aside any bodies of written essays or other written materials. And we will also we will also turn into deeper analysis at our second January meeting, which I wanted to invite all of you at this point. I guess Natalia has more specific knowledge about the next meeting, but that will be it will be online as well, and the perspective will be a little bit different, because today we wanted to focus on maybe more theoretical stuff from the perspective of editors of those two audio paper projects, but the second meeting will be, more from the perspective of particular essays, materials, and stuff. And something personal for me that I'm really excited and happy to be. I was really excited and happy to moderate this discussion, as probably this is the for some future last thing I'll be hosting as a member of Glissando collective, and to close it out, with such beautiful discussion was really an honor to me. And I think, yeah, because Natalia is writing about the meeting, and I'll leave the floor for her.
So we're still establishing the details, but the meeting would take place around the 20th of January. As I have collected all your email addresses, I will allow myself to send you the information once we have more details so that you could decide whether you want to join or not. We'll try to record the second meeting as well. And as for this one, I will just stop the recording. And once it's processed, I will share the link to all of you so that you can download it, watch it again, and hopefully enjoy again.
And quote.
Remember always to quote us and yourself.
Yeah, I just also wanted to very briefly thank all of you for coming here.